Hi, I'm Zane Stein with the Astrology Collective, and we're here with Karen Hamaker-Zondag.
Zondag.
I'll get it one of these times.
Yeah.
And welcome, Karen. It's nice to see you. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'd like to start off by asking you a little about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Schiedam, which is what you can consider a kind of suburb of Rotterdam. And then I moved when I was 2.5 years old to the middle of the country, which was a totally different atmosphere, a busy city of Schiedam, Rotterdam, to a rural area, a very Christian area. And there I lived until I was 16, and then I went to Amsterdam. And from that moment, I started to go to university at 16 and be on my own in Amsterdam. And I stayed there for the rest of my life and living now in Amstelveen, which is just on the border of Amsterdam.
I'm very familiar with the contrast between a big city and a rural area. I grew up in Philadelphia, which is, when I was born, it was the third largest city in the U.S. And I have lived in small towns, and I have lived I actually on a house on somebody's farm at one point. So I know the big transition from one to the
Yes.
other. It's like two different universes.
It is. And although I was very young, I've always been very sensitive, so I could smell and feel the difference in atmosphere.
Believe it. So now most people, when they're children, have some idea, what they want to be when they grow up. I don't know about in Amsterdam area, but when I was a kid, I wanted to be a scientist, and I one way or other, that stayed with me my whole life, although it evolved into different formats. Did you have any memories of something you wanted to be when you grew up?
Not really. And I know I was and still am very interested in nature. I love to be in nature. I was always asking, if I looked at people, what is going on in their head, and so the kind of psychology, but there was not really an idea of studying psychology. Actually, what my father told me later was that when I was about 4 years old, I put all my dogs together. I used to do that, and put a pencil and paper in their hands, and I started to talk to them. So I think that somehow I'm a born teacher, and I wanted to teach, and that's what I'm still doing, and I love it.
I actually got a very visual when you did that. I can actually see that in my head. Believe me. Okay, so Jungian psychology is very much a part of your life. And
Yes.
did you get interested in psychology first, or astrology first, or were they concurrent?
Actually, I started with astrology, but very soon after that, Jungian psychology, I just started to read a book of Jung, and it was on archetypes. And although I didn't understand it the way I understand it now, I thought it was fascinating. It was a kind of recognition, a coming home, and it did so much to me that I wanted to read more of him. And so actually, I started with astrology, but I think within a year I also came across Jungian psychology. So actually, it went hand in hand.
By any chance, I know it's a long time ago, but do you remember what that first Jung book was?
It was Archetypes. That was on. Yeah.
I remember being fascinated by Jung. I picked up when I was in my late teens a book called Man and His Symbols.
Yes, that's the easiest book to read.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Because in those days, the easy was what I needed. Yes.
Yeah.
So you've already kind of said what drew you to psychology, but what specifically drew you to astrology? I know a lot of people, especially you were living in an area which is very Christian for a time. A lot of people just poo-poo astrology completely. What drew you to astrology?
That's a strange story. It seems as if somehow in heaven they pointed me to astrology, because I was at university and it was a big building with several different studies. I did study geography and social geography, and later on I did also something you have no English word for, but it is land and country and city planning plus environmental issues.
Hmm.
And it was and the economy faculty was there too. It was very big, and it was I think it was about 19 or so that I came into the canteen, and it was really big, and there was only one table with one student sitting there, young man, and for the rest empty, and for the rest every tables were occupied. So with our group of students we sat next to him, and I don't know why, but all of a sudden the topic was astrology. And he was very confident about astrology, and he said, well, if you know your birth time, you can give it to me, and you can call me and I will tell you something about you. And I knew my birth time from a baby book of my mother, so I gave it to him, and I got his phone number, and I phoned that night. And I must say, I'm always very open to what you don't know, so I didn't reject astrology. It simply wasn't part of my life. And I knew everybody was laughing and rejecting it, but I phoned him, and he told me some of the things that I thought, you cannot know that. You cannot know that. So what is this? And he said, well, you can phone me next week and I'll tell you some more. So I did phone him next week. He didn't answer the call. I tried for months. He never answered the call anymore. So he has been in my life one day, but that triggered me. And so I thought, everybody says astrology is nonsense, but this has happened to me. He did tell something he did not know. So the only thing I can do is to find out what the truth is and what reality is. Well, I ended up being an astrologer.
Um, I I discovered astrology by talking to a young lady who had this wheel, and she was looking at a book, and she was scribbling in the circle on a piece of paper. And I said, do you mind if I ask you what you're doing? And she said, I'm working on an astrological chart. And she said, and I said to her, you don't really believe in that, do you? So she looked up at me, and I can tell you, I can paint the picture, because I later found out she was a Scorpio with a Scorpio rising, right? So,
Oh.
so imagine the look she gave me. She looked right through the back of my head. She said, what's your birth time, birth date? So I gave it to her, and she started telling me things she couldn't possibly know. And just like you, that's what got me into astrology.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's my understanding you began your astrological practice after graduating for the University of Amsterdam in '75. Did you learn astrology initially on your own, or did you attend some classes to introduce? In other words, are you mostly self-taught, or do you have
It's
mentors?
actually both. I went to classes. I tried to find astrologers, but there was a kind of basic course here and some other course there, and there was not really a systematic a place where you could learn astrology in a systematic way. So I started to read whatever I could, and at that time, it was, I think, 71 or 72. If you found an astrology book, it was like a treasure that you found it, because there was not so much. But it was an esoteric bookstore in Amsterdam, and there I found a lot of stuff. And I'm lucky living in Holland, and lucky that I have had to learn my languages, because nobody speaks Dutch. And so in school we learn English and German and a little bit of French. So I could read the German astrology books and the English astrology books, and it gave me a broad perspective on astrology, and saw that there are two different worlds. That Germany is doing things different from the English-speaking part of the world. And so I started to read and read and read. I always say I have one addiction, and that is reading. And from there, I learned so much. So I needed the help in the beginning of teachers, but pretty soon I asked them questions that they couldn't answer. So then I was doing much and much more on my own.
I think that you have a blessing living in a country where you were learning several languages, and that was the norm, because in America, learning a second language is an afterthought. I mean, you have a choice in high school. You can pick the language you want and take it as one of the courses, but they don't spend a lot of time when you graduate high school. If you have any background in that language at all, it's enough to ask for something at a restaurant, or tell the taxi driver where your hotel is, but that's about it, you know. So that is a blessing, you know, that you had that option.
Absolutely.
So were any particular astrologers that you feel had the greatest impact on you, either through direct contact or through their books?
Well, I have read many books, and with every book I wanted to put it to the test. Do I see in practice what they tell? And of course, at that time, you read Liz Green and Rudyard and all those, but also in German, Thomas Ring and so many others. So and names that are forgotten now, like Gustav Schwickert. And so it's actually a very. I was reading everything, and what was influential was actually that what resonated, that from which I could feel there's something in it, and being Jungian and having a Jungian point of view, of course you see then that Liz Green and Howard Sportas and all parts of Arroyo and others, and later on Richard Tarnas have an influence. But all my life I've been kind of stubborn. I just first want to see myself. Is it really true what they are saying? Do I see that in practice? Can I agree with that? And so I took information and practical advice and from whatever book I could take, and that and integrated that into how I'm using astrology and working with astrology.
What about psychologists? Aside from Carl Jung, is there any psychologist that you feel drawn to the works of? You know, a lot of people, when I ask that question, they say James Hillman, for example. Is there any?
Of course, but also Rollo May. I think he's an excellent psychiatrist. I love his work, and there are so many others. Marie-Louise von Franz, Barbara Hanna, for example, but also spiritual teachers who touch upon astrology, like Ram Dass, and think about Stanislav Grof, and so there is a Jan Ehrenwald. He's a parapsychological interested psychiatrist, and he's also very interesting. So it's also very broad there, but the way and Edward Edinger, he is an excellent Jungian also, but the way I work with it is that no matter if it's a Jungian psychologist or not, if their findings fit into what I can see in practice, then I take them on board.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think of myself as mostly Jungian in my attitudes to psychology, but there are a couple of us psychologists that are not Jungian at all that I've been drawn to, like Fritz Pearls, for example.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I took some of his stuff and found it really worked in the books that I've read from it. So I do get the idea. So about 1980, you began your school for astrology, and like I don't pronounce Dutch, so Stichting Achernar.
Stichting Achernar is the Dutch pronunciation, and Achernar is a fixed star and is on my ascendant, and Stichting means foundation. So that was actually when I started to learn astrology, I was frustrated that there was no place where you could go and learn it from the beginning to the end. And so when I was proceeding into astrology and really going into it, I thought that one day, if I'm good enough, I'll start a school where people can learn from the beginning until the end. And that's how Stichting Agenaar started.
Okay, and you have another school you started a few years later, which was a Jungian psychology school. And
Yes.
I won't try to pronounce that.
Well, this is also a foundation, and the name is Audrey in Dutch, but it's from Icelandic, Audrey, and it's from the vessel of wisdom from Odin that he lost, and the dwarfs had stolen it from him, and his ravens took it back, stole it back, and were flying towards Odin to give it back. But when they were flying, they spilled some drops on earth, and where the drops fell, the poets were born. But in Iceland, a poet is one who understands symbolism. And so I thought that's a beautiful name for my school.
That is a beautiful. I actually have not read that tale. I think it's something that I would like to read a little bit on. You get a lot more Greek and Roman mythology where I grew up than you do, Norse or yeah.
Yes, yes.
So you basically over time, I understand you merged these two schools.
Yes, yes. What I did at that time, well, when I was teaching astrology, I told my students, if you are doing a chart for clients, you must know enough about psychology because you must be able to handle situations. So I had always a lot of Jungian stuff into my astrology courses, and also in the interpretation. And one day, a group of students who had finished their 4-year course, and we were at the closing ceremony, they all kept seated, and they said, we are not going to leave until you promise to give a Jungian course. And so I said, okay, I have so much material, I just do 1 year and just as a tryout and see if you like it. Well, that was the start of a Jungian school because they didn't want to stop, and now it's a 3-year basic course plus 2 so advanced courses in Jungian psychology. And at that time, that was 1986 that I started with that. The atmosphere in Holland was still a way that if you were teaching Jungian psychology and you were using astrology in that course too, many people wouldn't come because they didn't want to be associated with astrology. And so that's why I kept it separate. But nowadays, but from the beginning on, when I decided I will be an astrologer, that was 1975. I also decided, well, no matter how people look at me, no matter if they make fun of me, I'll just tell everybody with my backbone straight, I'm an astrologer. And so I always did. And uh, and slowly I began to see that people in business, etc., started to take me serious because I was also presenting me serious in other fields. And then came a moment that I decided just to merge the two in one bigger whole. And that was my academy. Still, people can study Jungian psychology separately without astrology, but it's the Jungian school is integrated now in the Academy of Applied Astrology.
Very cool. Yeah. Okay. So I was kind of stunned when I read one of their biographies that you've written like 35 books. That's a remarkable achievement. The first 2 of your books that I read were Psychological Astrology, a synthesis of Jungian psychology and astrology, and Aspects and Personality. And they actually both had a considerable influence in my thinking. What was your first book that you published, and was it the first one that got translated into English, or was it another one?
Yes, that was astropsychology. That was the first book. Yes.
I would really advise, anyone who's listening to this or watching this, that if they have not read that book, they pick it up. I know it's still in print. I've seen it on Amazon. Are you working on any other books at this point in time?
What I'm doing now is that we publish a yearbook every year. We have, and it's about 120 pages. And what I do there is, for a big part, mundane astrology, cycle research, etc. And if there are very interesting psychological topics, of course, psychological astrology too. But in the last, well, say from 2010 on, I have been working on a digital teaching environment, just making blended learning possible. And I have developed more than 350 lessons in that system. And that means that everything I wanted to explain to my students is in there. So they can watch it wherever they are in the world and whenever they want. And exercises are there. And then we have online classes in which they can ask questions. And then we have a training in the school on location. So and so I've been working on making those 350 or more lessons. And that's much more than writing books, I can tell you, but that's what I've done. And I'm almost finished with what I wanted to do. So that's the work at this moment.
I feel like asking you, do you ever sleep?
A little bit too little. And I started to feel that because of course you grow older. So I have to take care, but it's also fascinating to do. And so it's a joy to do.
Well, there's a book that came out several years ago, which says, do what you love and the money will follow, or something like that, and I don't know about money, but the first part, do what you love, that should be what everybody is doing.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And then you get your energy, and then then you won't think about having a pension or whatever. I cannot imagine sitting still behind the flowers in the window, looking outside and having nothing to do. My son is always joking. He says, you are so busy, you will even come late on your own funeral because you still have to do something. So
yes, I can just imagine you coming there and realizing that the coffin needs to be straightened out or something, and go over and straighten. Okay, so let's go from here and talk a little bit about what you're going to be talking about, the talk you're going to be giving us, the deeper meaning of the meanings of the fifth house, a Jungian perspective. Tell us a little bit about, tell us a little bit about your talk.
It is about that, in my practice, I found that clients with, for example, Venus or Jupiter in the fifth house didn't really enjoy life, didn't really enjoy themselves. So you see the most beautiful things written in books about those positions, but it wasn't true in practice. And I saw that some people with, for example, Saturn in the fifth house, that they had a lot of joy in their life. So I started to ask, why are some people with what we in astrology see as the beautiful positions, with I don't think there are beautiful and not beautiful positions, but what is in the books, why are they not enjoying their fifth house? And how can that what is said as a difficult situation, people are enjoying? So I dived into the question, why do we not enjoy ourselves? And then you see that it has a lot to do with self-acceptance and some other psychological dynamics. And and what I also have seen in astrology is that we tend, although that was the situation when I learned it, that we tend to see the houses as separate, but nothing is separate. It's not that if you are uh, active in the field of your fifth house, that the other houses are not in play too. They also influence you. And then I started to look at what kind of influences do you see in the if you are trying to live your fifth house. And I and then I saw that there are some hidden influences from other houses that if you have trouble in one of the houses, for example, if you have trouble in the 10th house, it will reflect in your 5th house. But what people don't know is that if you have trouble in your 3rd house, if you have a psychological problem around your 3rd house, then also your 5th house is affected. And so I saw a kind of invisible threads between the houses, and that you sometimes be better off working on another house to make the 5th house work than just focusing on the 5th house. And that's what my topic is.
Yeah. Wow. I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah. So what do you hope is the most important thing people will take away when they leave your course, when they leave the talk? What do you hope that they will take with them?
Actually, that they can look in the mirror and say to themselves, I love you.
Wow, that's a big one. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a very big one. So would you recommend any of your books for somebody after the talk who wants to get more deeply into the houses, the psychological aspect of the houses, perhaps?
I have written a book on the houses that is translated in English. And but I would also recommend after that my book on yachts, because I will touch upon that issue of yacht relationships too.
Is there anything else that you would like to mention before we finish up for today?
There's something that is not mentioned that often in astrology, which I've been active in a Dutch scientific group of studying parapsychology. And so I did a lot of research in what are parapsychological phenomena in the chart. And I think that if I look at all the books, beautiful books on for example, mundane astrology, on psychological astrology, what I do miss is that parapsychological part, those phenomena. And I have written a book on that, but that has never been translated. And I think that we can help so many people. So many people have parapsychological phenomena they don't dare to talk about. And it's better now than it was 20 years ago, but still. And I think if astrologers can comfort those people by understanding it and being able to see what is happening in the chart, I think we can offer even more help than we do already.
I haven't really given the parapsychological aspect much thought, so it's something I will have to contemplate. I know you have websites in both Dutch and English.
Well, the English one, the English one has to be redone, so it's not yet there.
Okay, so if you wanted to give the name of the Dutch the address of the Dutch website, I know if you're lucky enough to understand Google Translate, you can put the address into it and it'll convert it into English. Would you care to give the address of the Dutch website?
Of course, and it's simply www. and then my name, Karen Hamaker-Zondag.com.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much for talking. It's nice to see you, and I feel your energy come through my computer, which is really, really great.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you for inviting me.
It's been a great pleasure. All right, so I'm going to say good night and look forward to your talk.
Thank you.